Hey, welcome back to the program. We have on the line with us Congressman Rick Crawford. Rick, how are you, sir?
Hey, good. How you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. It's Johnny Cash Friday, so we're always, kind of a little extra hyped up. Now, where are you right now? Are you in Arkansas right now, or are you in D.C.?
I'm in Arkansas. I'm in Carline dropping my kids off.
All right.
School.
All right. Well, I mean, what's going on right now? I mean, are we still? When's Congress going to get back in the full swing of things? You know, people are, the Democrats are whispering impeachment. Rick, you think that's going to happen?
Well, we go back in session on Monday. I know that Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the Judiciary, has been busy, trying to work up articles of impeachment. And the thing that Nancy Pelosi has done is sort of tried to distance herself from that to some degree. But what people need to understand is, in fact, that she controls everything. It's not like, when we had the majority, the speaker, whoever that was, whether it was John Boehner or whether it was Paul Ryan, the speakers, they deferred to the House, the committee chairs, and let the committee chairs set their agenda and do their thing. Nancy Pelosi doesn't do it that way. She has locked down every committee. So if she wants to feign this sort of distance from an impeachment movement, it's not going to wash because she's the one that controls the committees 100%. They're not going to do anything that she doesn't give her okay on in any committee, the Ag Committee included. Can't do anything without her saying so. As simple as having a hearing on, some sort of a benign FSA program, that's got to be cleared by her. So the idea that somehow she is not integrally involved in impeachment, that's just not going to wash. She knows what's going on. She can't have it both ways.
Again, we're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford. I agree. There's certainly she seems to be walking some sort of tightrope, and it seems like everything the Democrats though right now are trying is it doesn't seem to be working. Their attacks don't seem to be working. Then of course they've got the media that's helping them, but then the Democrats they'll go off and they'll do something like the climate debate on CNN a couple of nights ago,
right,
where Bernie Sanders says that maybe we need abortions to save the planet in poorer countries. I mean, this is just getting out of hand.
Well, it's ridiculous, and he's made that comment, and it's my understanding that white males were not supposed to be talking about reproductive rights. So, but apparently that's okay for him to do that, and to somehow tie abortion to climate change. I guess the concern I have is this: if the Democrats had their way, would they implement some kind of a review panel to determine whether or not a woman could keep her child based on a variety of situations, circumstances, or whatever? If you don't have enough money, if you're too much carbon emissions, if you're not driving the right car. This sounds a little ridiculous, but you get the point. It's like, why are you even going down that road with this conversation to suggest that somehow what we need to do to affect climate change is now start to abort babies? So that in itself is ridiculous. And so obviously the analogies that I've drawn there are you get the idea. Yes, it's ridiculous, but is that maybe the next step, that we start to put look, in China, they do have forced abortions there. So it's probably not out of the realm of possibility that people like AOC and Bernie Sanders might consider implementing a forced abortion policy for certain circumstances. Could be maybe that, the health of the child is not what it should be, and so they're not going to allow the mother to keep the child because maybe they feel like, well, it will be too difficult on society to have to care for this child because it's a special needs child and they're socioeconomically challenged, and therefore we don't want to have that. So we just go ahead and abort that child. And of course, the government will pick up the tab for it. But
of course.
So that it almost sounds like that's the direction that they're willing to go.
Well, I would agree with you. I don't put anything past them. I mean, the party that thinks that you can abort a baby at 9 months, they if not after the baby's born, they fundamentally have a different value of life. They only value life when they say it's a life. They don't, and so it's like, okay, do I, can I have a baby? Well, let's save up for enough carbon credits, or, what's the weather like in my area of the world? That'll determine, because, they're fundamentally saying, Congressman Crawford, they're saying that if you'll just do this, then we can control the weather. Now, this is socialism most of the time. Their answer
right.
to, controlling the weather is socialism, and it's just nuts, and I think it's actually helping Donald Trump get to a second term, quite frankly.
Well, I do too, but I think that what you're seeing too on display is the left there are science deniers when it suits their agenda, and then they try to act as though they embrace science when it doesn't suit their agenda. So, for example, this is another recent dust-up. They're all about this lab-grown meat. That's okay. Lab-grown meat. So science tells them that it's basically the same thing as beef or chicken. So according to scientists, they're eating beef and chicken. So there's a lot of things wrong with that. Number one, if you're a vegan and you're espousing lab-grown meat, that seems to be a conflict of interest for you, because you're supposed to not want to eat meat of any kind. But now you're saying that's okay. On the other hand, you're saying you're denying the science of genetically modified organisms because you find those to be bad, and we've heard the moniker Frankenfood applied to GMO. So GMO soybeans, other GMO corn, other commodities. Oh, that's bad. It's bad for the planet. It's bad for people. You shouldn't eat it. So how could lab-grown meat not be bad? Because it's science produced. It's
interesting.
There's something not biologically appealing about growing a piece of meat in a petri dish and peeling that off and slapping it on a bun and calling it a burger.
Ugh.
So when do we take these people to? When are they held to account for their varying degrees of belief in science? It just, none of that matches up, And so I get tired of hearing this nonsense.
Yeah.
To say nothing of what it would do to our economy, as they attack animal agriculture on ethical basis, but they're perfectly okay to kill babies in the womb right up to the point of delivery and maybe even after.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So there are a whole lot of anomalies here and some incongruencies in their policies that I find to be pretty egregious.
Let's transition now. You mentioned China just a second ago. I see here where they're trying to get back to the trade table. Going to try to work this out one more time. What are your thoughts on the trade war?
Well, a couple of things I think we probably need to take a look back here and recognize. First off, we never had a trade deal with China. We never have. So if the Trump administration is successful in securing a trade deal with the Chinese, that will be a monumental accomplishment. Because all these years we've never had a trade deal with China, which is part of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But then the question is, if China doesn't follow WTO rules, how are we going to get them to follow our rules in a trade deal? So is this just going to be a photo op and, okay, great, we got a deal, and then we're going back to business as usual? Or how are we going to enforce that? Because the Chinese have shown time and time again that rules don't matter. They don't play by the rules. They don't care. And therefore, how are we supposed to enforce a trade deal with a country that routinely flouts the rules? And so bringing them into the WTO when we did was essentially a validation of bad behavior. They've not been held to account in the WTO. I'm not trying to be negative, but what I am saying is, look, I'm for a trade deal if we can get it, but let's be realistic about, the historical context and what that portends for a trade deal. And so I think the best case scenario is that we probably don't get a deal. We probably will continue to see China be belligerent. And I think what we need to do is what the president is working on now, and you see evidence of it with the deal with Japan, and that is to establish trading relationships bilaterally with countries like Japan, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Singapore, the Philippines, and set up a Pacific Rim distribution network. And basically, if China wants to buy from us, they'll have to buy retail. And that's to me, that's the really only viable way we can do business in China and still expect any kind of level of fair play, because we wouldn't be directly dealing with China. We would be dealing with a distributor network in the region. And look, the other thing is, you ask any businessman anywhere, do you think it's a good idea for us to put 60% of our business in the hands of one customer?
Mm-hmm.
And they'll probably tell you no.
Yeah.
So I think it's important for us to realize, whether we're able to get a deal with them or not, how do we enforce it? Going forward over time, how do we enforce the rules of this deal, number one? And number two, without the adequate backstop of trade deals in the region, distributor networks, for lack of a better term, then we're going to be having this conversation again when they violate the terms of our trade deal. Not if, but when they violate the terms of our trade deal. So I'm not trying to be negative and throw water on this. I'm hopeful that we could arrive at something so that we could, set standards for a deal, for a trade relationship that would be good for both parties. But I think the other thing we have to understand is we've never really had a relationship with China, because a relationship implies some level of mutual respect. And there's never been that level of respect on their part for us. It's always been a one-sided deal. The trade imbalance is astronomical. On ag commodities, they are $100 billion, with a B, $billion out of compliance in direct violation of WTO rules, and they've never been held to account for it. So we just, as the American people, as American farmers, need to know the full background and what the lay of the land is going forward. And so, yeah, I'm encouraged, bring them to the table. Let's talk it over. But at the same time, we need to get out there and make those deals with the other nations with whom we have good relationships, in countries like Vietnam, Philippines, Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, and India, and really focus on those bilateral deals and set those nations up as distributors for U.S. products.
I think that's a great idea, and honestly, I hadn't even heard that until you just mentioned it. But I do remember, I think a couple of weeks ago at the G7. By the way, we're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford on China and trade. At the G7, there was that announcement that the president, the United States, had reached a deal on corn purchases with Japan, and I mean, a lot of people thought that was a really, really productive deal.
That is a big deal. The problem we're going to have with the Japanese, it really, unfortunately, they're not going to accept U.S. rice. And so U.S. rice producers know this. They know this was a huge sticking point in the TPP, among other things, is that Japan has a cultural view of rice that doesn't necessarily acknowledge U.S. rice. And so they basically discriminate against U.S. rice. It's always been a problem and real difficult for us to access the Japanese market. And, Korea used the same argument, and to a degree, I get it, but at some point in time, they'll have to recognize that they're probably going to have to buy some U.S. rice, probably just out of necessity, and sort of, maybe get over their cultural bias against non-Asian grown rice. And that's really all it is it's a cultural bias against U.S. grown rice because they prefer Asian grown. But even then, in the Asian theater, you have different Asian countries that don't even like other Asian country grown rice. I mean,
Really?
so
Wow.
they do have their own sort of cultural biases built in.
Wow. Yeah, that's kind of like different dialects in the South.
Sure it is. Yeah.
That's fascinating. I didn't know that. Well,
Hmm.
again, we're talking with Congressman Rick Crawford. He was in the middle of dropping his kids off at school, and here's the thing here's the question back on the meat in the petri dish. Does a piece of meat in a petri dish, pass gas? Because that they're very concerned with cows in the field doing that. Rick.
Well, probably after you eat the petri dish meat, you will pass gas.
That's true.
And so you'd be contributing to global warming. I mean, but the other thing is, this kind of points to if you're vegan and you're out there espousing meat, lab-grown meat, what happened to your principles? Because as a vegan, you don't eat meat. But you're willing to eat meat if it's lab-grown? So, well, wait a minute now. You talk about moving the goalposts. It's like, it really kind of underscores who we are as human beings. We crave meat. We want meat. We just do. But, when you have to go out and, there's not a whole lot of people today who have gone out and looked their dinner in the eye, so to speak. And then people sometimes just don't have the stomach for it because, you killed Bambi, or, you killed that calf or that steer or whatever, and I just can't take that. Well, I get it. And if you can't, that's fine. But who doesn't like a nice, juicy cheeseburger?
Hey, yep. Me too. And
who doesn't like that?
That's the other thing, to see Kamala Harris up there on stage shamefully admitting, well, I confess, I eat a cheeseburger every now and then. Do these people actually think that the American people are going to win, or that the American people are going to buy this and they're going to vote for them when they're, shamefully
I tell you what,
Go ahead.
I encourage people to eat cheeseburgers, a nice big, a nice prime rib, a good ribeye. It really is nice, and chicken, a nice stuffed chicken breast. I love that. I encourage you to go out and eat that because, as human beings, we crave meat. And I'm not saying we don't crave salad. We're omnivores. We crave anything. We love Oreo cookies. I mean, I love all that stuff. So why restrict yourself and why deprive yourself because you want a virtue signal about how sensitive you are to the needs of the planet? Look, let's be honest about it. We all love Oreo cookies. We all love a good juicy cheeseburger, and you're denying yourself. And let's be honest about it. And there really is only one reason. It's mostly political. Now there are some people obviously that do have some dietary issues, and maybe meat they have a hard time digesting it, and I get that. That's fine. But maybe that doesn't necessarily take away from their craving for real meat. They've just had to make some dietary restrictions because maybe they just can't digest meat, and that's fine. I get that. But the whole idea that you're politicizing people's diets now,
I know,
is just out of control.
Yeah, it is. It is out of control. Congressman Rick Crawford, I hope you have a great weekend, sir. Thank you so much for spending some time with us.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All righty.